Hello from Jihad and the World, a podcast that explores the intersection of Western and Islamic cultures. The author is Mark Silinsky of Kensington Security Consulting, and today's episode will look at the changing face of Britain. The look, feel, and substance of Britain changed significantly from 1968 to 2018. In that 50-year span, Muslim populations mushroomed throughout the country. This episode is titled The New Multicultural Britain. To me, the most remarkable thing about the Koran is how progressive it is. Tony Blair, 2007. Britain is an epic poem of empire, civilization, liberalism, humanity, decline, and, today, multiculturalism. Minister Tony Blair promised to change Britain forever by throwing open the nation's door to immigration. He kept his promise, which will be discussed at length in the next few podcasts. Demographics. It's our country, it's not a Christian country. You jealous we taking over? A Muslim shopkeeper to a leader of a Christian patrol marcher. May 2017. By 2015, there were at least 3 million Muslims living in Britain. Of these Muslims, 47% were UK-born, 68% were ethnically Asian, and 33% were aged 15 and under, indicating that the Muslim population was relatively young. 8% of all school-age children, 5 to 15, were from Muslim households. Some schools have a high proportion of Muslim pupils, such as those in Washwood Heath in Birmingham, where 86% of school-age children were Muslim. As the Muslim population has grown, a powerful voting bloc has emerged. Muslims now form a decisive voting bloc, making up 20% or more of the electorate in 26 constituencies and present in all local authority areas in England and Wales. Islam will likely become the dominant religion in Britain within several generations. In addition to immigration and fertility, conversion is a source of new Muslims in Britain. Some converts have gained fame. Miriam Francois Serra became well known as a child for her role in the 90s hit film Sense and Sensibility. Now, she is gaining more recognition as one of the many educated, middle-class female converts to Islam in Britain. Britain, 1968 and 2018. This is London Calling, the British Broadcasting Corporation World Service's station identification. In 1968, the London scene burst with artistic creativity and social change. For years, living standards had been rising. A decade earlier, Tory Prime Minister Harold Macmillan toasted the growing prosperity with the cheery observation, "You never had it so good." There was social license as never before. Abortion was legalized and the birth control pill was available. The Beatles continued to define the Western music scene. They made their last TV appearance together in 1968 and produced the White Album. The Rolling Stones topped the charts with Jumpin' Jack Flash. Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull gave a free concert in Hyde Park. British actors performed nude in the London musical Hair. Top of the Pops was hosted by Jimmy Savile. Alan Bennett's first play, 40 Years On, was staged. On British television, Lindsay Anderson's If satirised a posh boarding school filled with boys gone bad. Also, in 1968, A Lion in Winter dramatised the pageantry and pathologies of a deeply dysfunctional royal family. The animated film Yellow Submarine fused the music of the Beatles with the artistry of Peter Max. Censorship in the theatre was abolished. Muslims were an increasingly noticeable but not yet prominent part of the social landscape. Many immigrants in the 1950s and 1960s came from India and Pakistan in search of a better standard of living. Many found it. They could earn 30 times as much in Britain as on the subcontinent. They, along with Jamaicans, Africans, and millions of other people of colour, had come to Britain to stay. 2018. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. London Bridge is falling down, my fair lady. 50 years later, Britain had changed many times. The Beatles had long since disbanded, and many musical genres had come and gone. Pink Floyd's Roger Waters was still shredding guitar and campaigning for political causes. In 2018, Britain was teeming with technology that could not have been imagined 50 years earlier. The internet, cell phones, DVDs, biomedical technologies and vape stores had long been staples for generations X, Y, and Z. There was a new architectural style, an anti-terrorist one. In London, government buildings had embedded barriers. If sexual mores had been liberalised in 1968, they would have become more confused 50 years later. The year before, a British convert to Islam was found guilty of attempting to join the Islamic State and of attempting to purchase a juvenile sex slave. In his words, "The younger and experienced, the better." Pakistani sex grooming gangs were exposed in many cities and found to have victimised many thousands of British white girls. Britain had become multicultural. A visitor on a London street would likely notice diversity in full bloom. An Afro-Caribbean takeout restaurant stands next to a salon hawking hair weaves and henna tattoos, which in turn is next to a Muslim bookstore. But Britons were increasingly careful with historic imagery that could set passions aflame. For years, athletic clubs and fashion houses had been removing cross emblems from their uniforms and sportswear. In 2016, the Middlesex Crusaders Cricket Club changed its name to the Middlesex Panthers. Sainsbury's stopped selling the real Easter egg in 2017 and began carrying a halal chocolate egg with no references to Jesus. The trend continued. Television shows touched on social strains and taboos, usually gently. BBC One's Casualty, a medical drama series, became the first mainstream British television drama to grapple with female genital mutilation. Cringe comedy drew some chuckles. Satirists had fun with an all-women gang of suicide bombers in Mesopotamia. In 2017, the BBC featured The Real Housewives of ISIS, a comedy sketch some viewers called revolting for trivialising British jihadi brides. Others enjoyed it as weaponised humour. Fashion in Britain reflected the country's transformed demographics. Large department stores sold Islamic garb and featured smiling hijab-clad women in their advertising. In 2017, London hosted the inaugural Modest Fashion Week. The statuesque models who strutted the catwalk wore clothes that promoters promised complied with Muslim values, while others called it a medieval fashion show. Advertisements for women's clothing on London's buses were less revealing than in earlier years. In solidarity with British feminists, the Muslim mayor pulled revealing bikini photographs which he called body-shaming ads. The appearance of British street toughs changed. The mods and the rockers of the early 1960s had long since disappeared. Gangs, some white and some Asian, loitered on the streets. Sharia patrols emerged in some cities. Religiously dressed young men demanded that passers-by follow Islamic Sharia law. Some were filmed shouting, "This is a Muslim area." 70 years after the Nationality Act and 40 years after the British politician Enoch Powell warned his countrymen about unchecked immigration, parts of Blackburn, Birmingham, Burnley and Bradford now have populations that are between 70% and 85% Muslim. Throughout Britain, the level of integration was uneven and, for some, alarming. According to a 2001 Daily Telegraph survey, many Muslims lived in cultural self-segregation. Many did not see themselves as British Muslims, but as Muslims living in Britain. By 2017, segregation was even more pronounced. Longitudinal medical studies also revealed abnormally high rates of genetic abnormalities among Pakistani British. This may have resulted from a tradition of marrying first cousins. Britain had changed. Muslims were an increasingly noticeable but not a prominent part of the social landscape. Many immigrants in the 1950s and 1960s came from India and Pakistan, seeking a better standard of living. Many found it. They could earn 30 times as much in Britain as they did in the subcontinent. They had come to Britain to stay, and some Brits had something to say about that. One very vocal critic was Enoch Powell, who is the subject of our next podcast. Thank you for listening to the episode of Jihad and the World. Nothing in this reading represents the official position of the United States government. Until our next episode, goodbye from Kensington Security Consulting.